Welcome back, foolish mortals, to the Haunted Mansion. Well, welcome to Teacup for One. My name is Matt, and I have 2 degrees, and welcome back to the latest installment of the Disney SEAverse. My personal theory that Disney is secretly working on the next great cinematic universe based on their theme park attractions from around the world. Now, if you haven't seen my past videos in the series, I will link them in the description down below, but for a bit of background, there is an Imagineering backstory based on the Society of Explorers and Adventurers, which is a fictional society full of colorful characters who link together Disney theme park attractions in parks all across the globe that are not already based on existing franchises. Now, I personally believe that Disney is currently gearing up to create a brand new franchise of interconnected films based on the theme park rides that are already tied into this backstory that they've been working on in the parks for a number of years. I've already covered how I think the Jungle Cruise film is going to kick off the franchise. I've talked about how the Tower of Terror film could work into the cinematic universe, but very recently, something very exciting happened because on August 28th, 2020, Disney announced that they are currently in development for a brand new live-action film based on the Haunted Mansion. The Haunted Mansion. And just to get this out of the way, no, unfortunately, it is not the long-awaited Guillmero Del Toro Haunted Mansion film, because let's face it, that movie already exists and it's called Crimson Peak. But based on the very little we know about this new Haunted Mansion movie, combined with the Haunted Mansion characters that have been trending over the past few years, this could pretty much confirm that we are, in fact, getting a Disney SEAverse. And yes, admittedly, the Haunted Mansion is notorious for having a slew of unofficial backstories to pretty well all 999 happy haunts. However, there is one connection between the Haunted Mansion and the Society of Explorers and Adventurers, and it is a canon connection. It is officially sanctioned and confirmed by Disney. It's very small, but very important, and it would make for an incredible film. But now, before I start speculating, let's look at the 2 pieces of official information we have about this upcoming Haunted Mansion film. The first is that it's happening. I mean, they said that about the Guillermo del Toro film, and here we are, but still, I'll be optimistic. The second is that it is being written by screenwriter Katie Dippold. Not a lot of information to go off of, but enough to get a sense of what direction this movie could go in. Katie Dippold is predominantly a comedy screenwriter. So she started off working in television with Mad TV, and then she worked on Parks and Rec. And for films, she's written The Heat, Snatched, Spy, as well as the 2016 Ghostbusters reboot. So just looking at her resume, it could initially be cause for concern that we're going to get another slapstick comedy kind of in the vein of the 2003 Eddie Murphy Haunted Mansion film. But that's kind of always been the struggle with the Haunted Mansion, is finding that balance between funny and scary. Tonality was a huge issue right off the bat with the Haunted Mansion. Walt knew he wanted to have a haunted house style attraction in Disneyland, but at the same time, he didn't want any of the scares to come from blood or gore or just graphic horror. And so the struggle became figuring out how to create a Disney-fied haunted house, and that took a lot longer than expected. The ride was originally supposed to open to the public in 1963, but it wasn't anywhere close to ready. So come 1963, all that went up was just the front facade of the Haunted Mansion with no ride inside of it. It didn't actually open up until I think 1969 or so. And during that time, there were just cute little signs posted outside saying, "Oh, the ghosts are coming," and Walt in interviews would say, "Oh yeah, well, it's delayed because we're just looking for ghosts to fill the Haunted Mansion," when in reality, there was just this ongoing struggle between the Imagineers just to figure out how to make the Haunted Mansion work. It's honestly a really fascinating story that merits its own video, but it really comes down to 2 key Imagineers, which were Marc Davis and Claude Coates. Both Marc Davis and Claude Coates started out working for Walt Disney as animators before they eventually transitioned into becoming Imagineers to work on the theme park attractions. Claude Coates was a background artist, and he wanted the Haunted Mansion to evoke fear and scares purely through atmosphere, whereas Marc Davis, who Walt Disney described as his go-to Renaissance man, recognized that the way to make the mansion appeal to people of all ages was through humor. So basically, on the one hand, you got the guy who wants to scare people, on the other hand, you have the guy who wants to make people laugh. After a lot of push, pull, and compromise between the two of them, they pulled off a pretty great collaboration that used Claude Coates' atmospheric, terrifying settings to set the stage for Marc Davis's story and characters. Really, the blend created an incredible form of truly dark comedy. So when you're looking at adapting the Haunted Mansion to film, it's almost essential to have a comedy writer at the helm, because comedy is that magic ingredient that makes the Haunted Mansion work. But again, it's a very fine line, because if you lean too far into the comedy, then it starts to diminish the scary. But I really think that Katie Dippold, based on her past work, is a pretty great fit, because she's already familiar with character-based comedy, having worked with Mad TV and Parks and Rec, and all of her films, even though they're comedies, have a pretty dark edge to them. There's another thing that Katie Dippold's films all have in common, which is that they are all female-centric stories. And if we are looking at ways that this new Haunted Mansion movie could play into the Disney SEAverse, it is worth noting that over the past few years, Disney has really put a lot of attention onto one of its female ghost characters. Incidentally, the only ghost or character in the Haunted Mansion who has an official connection to the Society of Explorers and Adventurers. I am speaking, of course, about the one and only Black Widow Bride, Constance Hatchaway. I do. I did. In sickness and in wealth. Now, SEAverse or not, out of the 999 ghosts in the Haunted Mansion, Constance is the natural choice to center a film around, and yet she did not even have a cameo in the 2003 Eddie Murphy movie. Why? Because she didn't exist in the mansion until 2007. Sort of. Like a version of her existed. Now, the Haunted Mansion has always had some kind of ghost bride haunting up in the attic. Originally, when the ride opened, she was like this skeletal corpse bride that was supposed to be like a female counterpart to the Hatbox Ghost, but then the Hatbox Ghost went away, and then the bride became this faceless entity that had a beating heart. For a while, the bride was just this really sad, tragic character, kind of like a Mrs. Havisham who was abandoned on her wedding day, and then I think she probably died of a broken heart. Then if you go over into Paris, you have Melanie Ravenswood, but she has her own separate slew of daddy issues that I'm not even going to get into right now. And then, in the early 2000s, Disney did a rehaunting of the Haunted Mansion, and that's when they gave the bride an entirely new persona and new backstory, and she became Constance Hatchaway. So, as the official Constance story goes, she was this beautiful young woman in the mid to late 1800s who just had this habit of marrying rich guys, decapitating them on their wedding night, banking their money, and then moving on to the next one. And she did this like 5 times. Now, the clues to this backstory are very subtle. They are entirely visual, mostly in the attic scene, but they are there. When you ride through the attic, you go past 5 wedding photos, and as you pass by each wedding photo, you notice that she gains 1 set of pearl necklaces for each husband that she's knocked off, basically. And as you move past each photo, the heads of the husbands disappear, almost as though their ghosts are warning you as you move through the attic that she decapitated them before you encounter her yourself, and she throws you out the window. When the story of Constance and her 5 husbands was integrated into the mansion, the Imagineers decided to take it one step further by retconning Marc Davis's stretching room portrait of the old woman. Originally, that character's name was Abigail Patecleaver, and she really had no bearing on the story of the Haunted Mansion beyond that one appearance in the stretching room. However, now, that character is meant to be Constance Hatchaway as an old woman sitting on the grave of her 5th and final husband, George, who was the owner of the Haunted Mansion. This small detail pretty much confirms that once Constance murdered George, she was content with all the wealth that she'd accumulated from the 5 marriages and just decided to live out the rest of her natural life as the owner of the Haunted Mansion. But All of that is just backstory. And it begs the question, how does this play into the society of explorers and adventurers, and how could it work as a movie? Believe it or not, Disney has actually put out a canon explanation for how Constance's murders have affected the haunting of the Haunted Mansion, and it would make for a very compelling film with a really great journey throughout the mansion uncovering the secrets and its past. Now just bear with me on this next part. A few years ago, Disney released a game on their website called The Haunted Mansion: The Black Widow Bride. And the whole mission behind this game was that you had to enter the Haunted Mansion and find and subsequently free the ghosts of Constance's 5 murdered husbands, who were all manifesting themselves as different haunts within the mansion, which are actual animatronics that exist in the Haunted Mansion ride. Constance's first husband, Ambrose, is one of the spirits that's trapped in the corridor of doors. Try saying that 5 times fast. Corridor of doors, corridor of doors, corridor of doors, corridor of doors, corridor of doors. I have 2 degrees. Husband number 2, Frank Banks, is the man trying to escape from the coffin. Husband number 3, the Marquis de Doom, which, if that's your name, how can you not expect to be murdered, is reportedly trapped somewhere in the attic. Husband number 4, Reginald Kane, is the man in the cemetery who is just sealing himself into his own crypt, brick by brick. And that brings us to husband number 5, George. Now, the video game only tells us that George is depicted in the stretching room portrait of the tombstone that Constance is sitting on, but we already knew that. Think back. Remember how I said that the theory is that as you go through the attic, the ghosts of Constance's husbands are trying to communicate with you and warn you about her tendencies by showing us their wedding photos and then having their heads disappear? What if Constance's 5th and final husband took it one step further, and instead of showing us his head disappear in an image, he manifested as a physical entity with a disappearing head? A physical entity, if you recall, was originally installed in the Haunted Mansion as a counterpoint to the then corpse bride. That's right. George becomes the Hatbox Ghost. And how does this play into the society of explorers and adventurers? Because before he was the Hatbox Ghost, in life, he was George Hightower of the Hightower family, relative to Harrison Hightower III, the man responsible for Disney's other most prolific haunted building, the Tower of Terror. So, there you have it. The most richly developed official backstory from the Haunted Mansion, which is just itching to be a film. And considering the actors who have worked with Katie Dippold's screenplays in the past, I think the obvious choice for Constance Hatchaway is none other than Kristen Wiig. First of all, she's at the right age to play Constance at pretty well every stage of her life. We know that she can do funny, but she's also an incredible dramatic actor, and she's about to show off her scary side in Wonder Woman 1984, so it's really just the perfect role for her at this time. And on top of that, again, the Haunted Mansion is all about finding creative people who are able to strike that balance between funny and scary. And I think she's a perfect fit. But for now, friends, that concludes yet another episode of Teacup for One. Let me know in the comment section down below, who do you think would be the perfect actor to portray Constance Hatchaway? And do you think the Haunted Mansion could be the next installment in the Disney SEAverse? And of course, if you haven't subscribed to my channel but you want to hear me talk even more about the Disney SEAverse or about Disney in general, sometimes Shakespeare, sometimes Funko Pops, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. It's super easy. All you have to do is click on my face. Thank you for joining me once again today, everyone. My name is Matt and I have 2 degrees, and that's the Teacup for One. Okay, go away.